Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Wow, what an amazing live stream we had last night. I hope to see more of you there next Saturday, but that's not why we're here. We're here for today's encounters. So before we get into those, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They all were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost you a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon and please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things, they really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. And folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into today's upload, shall we? Today's first encounter comes to us from Oregon. I live in the mountains about 10 miles outside of a small town. I live near a winding back road highway well known for its many fatal accidents, a lot of which happen to be collisions with animals, deer, small rodents, sometimes more often than not, mountain lions. I grew up in the country my whole life, so I've seen just about every wild animal my side of the state has to offer, whether alive or roadkill. Recently, I saw one that I could neither identify or rationalize. My husband and I had stopped for dinner with a coworker in town down that windy road from our home. Once it grew close to midnight, I knew we should be heading back. My husband insisted he wanted to stay a bit longer to have a drink with his buddy. Reluctantly, I agreed that he could stay, even though he knows I hate going home late by myself. We have about a half-a-mile driveway leading to our home, which is blocked off by a padlocked gate. I get paranoid every time I have to get out of my car and unlock the gate, pull inside, and then relock the gate behind me. Not that I'm afraid of someone attacking me, but way up in the country, a wild animal mauling me. The number of mountain lions and bears in our area was definitely above average. I headed back home alone, my husband promising me he'd only be about another hour. I took the dangerous road extra cautiously this evening. The thick cover of trees surrounding the road made it pitch black. After finally arriving to my road, I hit the gravel faster, eager to get inside. What I saw next made me slam my brakes so hard I fishtailed a bit, scattering gravel every which way. What I saw, barely 2 feet from my car, was incomprehensible. It looked almost human figure at first. It appeared emaciated. Its ribs stuck out so far they took a barrel shape. It was hunched over, but if it stood straight, it'd have to be at least 8 feet tall. Tufts of matted fur all over its body. What skin shone through appeared mangled, mutated. Long limbs almost resembling human arms, but too thin and discolored. Its legs arched like a wolf's. It had no sign of a human face. The face had what seemed to be a snout that contained a sharp set of canine teeth that showed as it snarled at me. My eyes locked with its piercing yellows. It stared me down for what felt like an eternity. Then all of a sudden it broke our gaze, swiftly disappearing into the woods. I was so scared I sat in my car until my husband arrived home an hour later. He had to knock on my window to get my attention. He questioned me about it once. We were safely in our home. I've been dealing with paranormal experiences with spirits since I was a child, but my husband says he has never seen me this shook up before. I guess I'm not good with something that can rip me limb from limb. I'll take a ghost over this creature any day. Tonight's second encounter comes to us from Lower Michigan 5 years ago. from a law enforcement officer. They found the first body. It was a hiker that had gone missing weeks prior. When my partner and I arrived on the scene, we had found the responding officers visibly shaking, one of which had vomit drying on his uniform. The other officers that were on duty were making a conscious effort to avoid the taped-off thicket of woods while talking to the Boy Scout troop that had the misfortune of stumbling upon the remains of a hiker draped over a branch about 12 feet from the ground. My partner and I went under the tape and headed over to the tree to investigate the scene. As soon as we were within 25 feet of that tree, we were hit with the sickly, sweet smell of death. I immediately grabbed the Vicks I kept in my blazer pocket along with a dust mask, rubbed the Vicks under my nose, and put the mask over my nose and mouth. It was too late for my partner, as I saw him scrambling away to the brush pile to relieve his stomach of breakfast that we had only eaten an hour ago. I approached the tree by myself as a few officers who could stomach the smell were taking pictures of the scene and looking for clues as to what had occurred there while we waited for the coroner to arrive. My first instinct was that the unfortunate hiker had come across a female bear and her cubs, but the suspicion was soon allayed when I saw the remains of the body for the first time. It was draped over a branch backward, with the top 3/4 of its skull and face barely hanging from the back of its scalp. Its silver-white hair flowed in the gentle breeze. He looked to have been about 6 feet and roughly 180. There was no way a bear native to Michigan could drag a corpse 12 feet into a tree, not to mention that there would be no reason for a bear to do that. I had briefly thought about a mountain lion attack, but cougars were extremely rare in the lower peninsula, and they usually bury what meat they don't immediately consume. All of these thoughts went through my head in about 2 minutes while I stared at the carnage before me. While I initially ruled out an animal attack, I thought it best to contact the DNR over to Cadillac to confirm my theory. Once my partner stopped puking and approached the tree now wearing his mask, I had him call DNR post to see if there was an officer in the area that could come and investigate. We were in luck, as there was an officer in Bitely that would be on scene about 15 minutes. By this point, the local news crews had arrived and were pestering the officers for a lead. I've been a detective for 26 years in October, so I had learned to tune out the news and focus on the investigation at hand, but my partner was a little greener than I was and had trouble focusing. I eventually got him to focus enough to notice the very large prints in the still damp mud. They were definitely animal in nature, but none that I had seen before. Paired with incredibly deep scratch marks around the tree's trunk, it was now decidedly better that we had contacted DNR. Once DNR arrived, I was pleasantly surprised to see a shapely young woman instead of an older man I was expecting in the area. While she was young, she was incredibly knowledgeable about the area and wildlife. She was actually a member of the local Potawatomi tribe, which would explain her knowledge of the area and wildlife. She explained the monstrous prints were canine in nature, but for the prints to be that large, the animal in question would have to be enormous, at least 400 to 500 pounds, and over 7 feet tall if on its hind legs. What I hadn't noticed until she said was hind legs. They appeared to be an approximate gape of a very large man and not canine. The newspaper article eventually read mountain lion attacks hiker, but I know that not to be true, and so does that DNR lady. Today's third encounter. This happened not too long ago, and I really need to share it to get it off my chest. I live in the deep south, and as such, I am used to traveling long stretches of highway without streetlights or civilization. I honestly prefer it, but that's because I'm in the safety of my vehicle. Walking in it is not the same. I was coming back home from visiting my sister a couple of counties over. She had gotten sick at the very beginning of the pandemic and almost died from it. She recovered, obviously, but her lungs suffered a good bit of damage. So I go and visit when I can now that everything is semi-back to normal. It's about a 4 to 5 hour drive, and I had left later than I intended, just because I got caught up talking. Once I got on the highway that will take me straight home, houses become sparse, and no streetlights can be seen, except for a few near houses. About 10 miles away from my home, my check engine light pops on, and no sooner did I look at it, my car began making this god-awful noise, and I had to pull over. Using the light from my phone, I tried looking under the hood, but couldn't see anything by this measly light. So I called my wife to come pick me up, and I would deal with it in the morning. No answer. She had a bad habit of letting her phone die and not realizing it. Calling a tow truck was not worth it because I'm so far out. By the time they get there, I could have walked home. So that's what I did. I'm in okay shape, and it's a straight shot home, so I figured no biggie. It was a peaceful walk for about an hour. It was a moonless night, but the stars were out and the crickets were chirping. But I realized that they had gone silent, and then I could swear I heard footsteps behind me. I stopped, and nothing. I guess it must have been my steps echoing, and I start walking again. There the steps were again, so I stopped. Same thing. I was a bit freaked out now and decided to experiment. I began walking again, and when I heard the steps, I increased my speed slightly. I could still hear the other steps matching my own. So, as a final test, I stopped suddenly. I heard 2 extra steps behind me. Now I know something was following me. My mind raced. Was it an animal? A meth head thinking they were going to rob me. As I was standing still, wondering what the hell to do, I heard 1 heavy step, and that's all I needed. I bolted. Now I could hear heavy footfalls, not even trying to disguise themselves. I knew I couldn't keep this up, and it was gaining on me. About that time, karma, divine intervention, whatever you want to call it, happened. A light appeared behind me, and I could hear an engine, but I didn't dare look behind, lest I slowed. A second or so later, a truck skidded to a halt next to me, and I heard a voice shout, "Jump in." I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed the side of the bed and rolled in the back, and no sooner had I, the driver sped off so fast I slid into the tailgate. I didn't really care. I looked back, but it was so dark I couldn't see anything, but I swear I heard a growl over the truck's engine. I looked back toward the cab, and the driver was opening the back window and had his interior light on. I recognized that it was my neighbor, about a mile apart, but still. I poke my head in the cab and tell him thanks. He looks at me with these wide eyes. WTF was that? I don't know, man. I just heard it chasing me, and I never stopped to look. He told me that he had seen my car some ways back and wondered if I needed any help, so he drove slowly looking for me. He said he spotted me running, and some giant, vaguely human shape was chasing me. He said it looked to be just shy of 7 feet by his guess and as wide as a barn. I asked him if he thought it was a bear, and he looked at me and said, "Do you think it was a bear?" I don't. We rode in silence to my house, where he dropped me off, and we'd go in the morning to see about the vehicle, he said. I thanked him and hurried inside and locked the door. Next morning, my wife was hysterical that she had let her phone die and I needed help, but I told her it was okay. I didn't tell her what had happened, though. My neighbor came around 9 a.m. and we drove out to my car. We decidedly did not talk about the night before, but that went out the window when we got to my car. It was destroyed. All the windows had been shattered. The tires looked like they had been slashed by some kind of claw. It looked like the Hulk had gone to town on it. Dents covered almost every inch. Worst of all, there was a deer carcass lying on the roof with its belly ripped open. That encounter reminded me of an encounter I had a subscriber send me about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. I'm going to go off the top of my head with it, but it's always kind of just sat there as something really terrifying that could happen to any of us driving a vehicle. So the guy was in his vehicle. He had just come back from a business meeting or something, and heading home out of state. And he was down south in some rural roads, which was the only way to get to where he needed to go. And as he's driving, he pops a tire. His tire just pops. Probably a hot day or something. I don't really remember. Like I said, it was about 1.5 years ago. I remember he'd gotten a flat. So he gets out of his vehicle. He gets his jack out, his spare, jacks it up, starts changing the spare. And as he is done changing the tire, he's got his donut on, and he's putting the lug nuts on. The main tire is sitting outside of his car, and he's got his jack down now because he's tightening up the lug nuts, so it's not jacked up yet, or anymore, excuse me. But everything is out of the trunk of his car. His trunk's open and everything. And he sees out of like the peripheral a large kind of creature go into the woods. Dark colored, really dark. Not bipedal, quadruped. And he then kind of just starts to rush a little because he's like, was that a wolf? Was it a bear? What was it? And as he's tightening up like the last lug nut, he hears a growl, and he looks back over, and this creature, Dogman, still on all fours, pops its head out of the woods where it had just entered and is now staring at him. And it gets into the road. It's maybe 50, 60 feet from him, and absolutely huge on all fours. Well, he's got his tire iron in one hand. One lug nut is the only thing that he's got to tighten. And he's looking at this creature. He's, thinking, what do I do? Do I tighten this lug nut? Do I throw all the crap in the car and take off? What do I do? And at that point, the creature stands up. And it's huge. It's 7-8 feet tall. Just a gigantic monster. He then, at that point, jumps into his vehicle because he's thinking, like, do I pick this stuff up, shut the trunk, because it's in the road. His tire, the jack are in the road. Trunk's wide open. Or do I just get in my car and go? Or get in the car, lock the door, and wait for it to go? Well, he gets in his car, and that's when all unrational thinking goes. And he punches it and gets out of there, starts the car and goes, leaving the tire iron, and the jack on the side, or not on the side of the road, in the middle of the road where he had, it's not in the middle, it's not on the yellow line, but it's in the roadway. And he said as he passed the creature, the Dogman reached for his door, missed. But as he's driving down the road, he starts to think about the experience. And he's like, if I had not noticed it, it would have gotten me while I was tightening the lug nut, because it was silent. The only thing that gave it away was the growl. So he starts to think about the size of this creature. And he's like, if I had stayed, this thing could have ripped the door off of the car and I would have been just gone or dead on the side of the road. And yeah, it was about a year and a half ago, because that experience then led me to think about Nancy Shaw, Dr. Nancy Shaw, who mysteriously was found in a ditch on the opposite side of the road from where her car was, car door wide open, and she's found in a ditch. A very prominent doctor. She's super smart, had a lot of people looked up to her, and this and that. Well, when they found her car, they found it pulled over to the side of the road, and she's in a ditch, badly, ripped up, attacked, just clearly attacked, bite marks, claw marks, and doors wide open. And then, like a year or two later, they try to say, this is in the middle of nowhere on Skyline Road in Georgia. And then they try to blame it on some guy like a year later and say it was his dog that did it. But there's just no way that this would have happened. Something very, very crazy and mind-blowing happened that evening for a doctor to, get out. The only thing I can think of is maybe the Dogman was playing dead, or kind of sticking out of the ditch just so the doctor couldn't get a size per, get that size view. How big is this? Oh, it doesn't look too big. Let's get out and see if we can help it. But yeah, these things are crazy. They're tactical. They're monsters. They're killers. The apex predators. We are not at the top of the food chain when it comes to these things. Anyway, moving on. Today's fourth encounter. When I was around 12, roughly 12 years ago, myself and my grandmother and uncle went to Jasper, Canada. Given how I was born in Canada itself, nothing weirded me out when it came to the woods and nature as a whole. I've seen and heard deer before and saw a slew of animals. I don't remember much from the trip other than bits and pieces, but what I do remember was arriving at the hotel and climbing up the steps to the second floor. The hotel had a parking lot in the front of the road. I remember waking up one morning in the hotel while my grandmother and uncle were still asleep, walking over to the window to peer out from behind the blinds to see a fox standing in the middle of the road. It looked like it had been run over, given how odd it was shaped. Concerned by its safety, I wanted to wake my grandmother up and simply run out there and check on it. I felt my stomach sink when it turned to face me. Its head looked bruised and misshapen, which I wouldn't have ruled out if it had been run over. But it was also standing on its hind legs. I turned my head away from the window and yelled for my grandmother to wake up, who slept in her bed just a couple of feet away from me, before I looked back and I saw this thing walk on its hind legs to the side where the building hid my view from the rest of the road. I looked completely insane when my grandmother moved me aside and saw nothing on the road, even going as far to open the door and peer down both ends of the walkway, and nothing. Regardless, I can say with confidence, I'm not going back to Jasper. And tonight's final encounter before we check out a few video clips. This next encounter, though, has a couple of very strange experiences that happen in the Philippines. Now, I've done a couple of subscriber experiences from the Philippines. There's been multiple sightings of Dogmen, the Aswang, which is this kind of witch-like creature that feeds on babies, and this is all culturally accepted. The Filipinos really have like a very, I guess, culture where this stuff is accepted and talked about. One of my friends that I went to school with lives there, and he said it's very strange there. I have to ask him. I'm going to ask him next time I talk to him if he's had any kind of experiences like this, but let's get into it. I've been going to school in the Philippines for the last couple of months, studying abroad due to the combination of my parents not wanting to look at me not being able to stand being at home, and it being super cheap, all under the guise of me learning more about my family's culture. This country's weird. And I don't mean it in that way. It's not like America kind of way, though I've had those moments once or twice. There's this energy here, not a hustle or bustle type energy, no. Laugh at me all you want. It's almost mythical. There are all sorts of things that lurk in the dark here, and people accept it as a daily fact of life. Walking back to my apartment in the middle of the night with some friends, we passed an old abandoned churchyard. Creepy enough as it is, but it gets worse when I saw this smushed face. I've assigned these things all nicknames because just thinking about these things and writing them down freaks me out. We take comfort any way we can, right? My way is assigning these things names that freak me out. Smush face, well, it was this skinny dude, except half of its face was caved in and scraped into a reddish-brown pulp, like a fatal motorcycle accident that decided to get up and walk. Except walk is not right. It kind of jerked here and there, like those Silent Hill nurses, but clearly less bosomed. I knew what I had to do. Generations of my family had stood up in the darkness and laughed. I shoved my hands in my pockets, lowered my head, and kept walking. That particular legacy is not mine to carry. The confident laughter echoing in my head faded into the night. My friend, one of the group, sided up next to me, head down and arms crossed, almost wrapping them around himself. "Do you see that thing too?" I peered out of the corner of my eye, seeing the figure jerking towards us. Yeah, we kept walking, taking as much comfort as we could in our friend's jokes and laughter. The thing vanished as soon as we were far enough away from the churchyard. Some other things, however, just have no explanation or reason. The way it was explained to me when I was younger is that weird things exist in our world, and they do weird stuff. Some are malicious, and sometimes we spot them just going about their business, and are lucky enough to not be on the receiving end of their attention. If you are that lucky and can shake off that moment of terror, then it really makes for quite a sight. Sadly, step 2 has proven difficult for me. There was another time I walked past a graveyard on my way to a study group. Noticing movement from the corner of my eye, I peered through the gate. There was a dark moving figure. I mean, really dark, like a living shadow, fluid and stark against the grays. It wasn't a trick of the light either. Normal shadows don't play off of light like that in late afternoon. They just don't. I vaguely humanoid shape slunk and climbed, sticking to the shade as it continued its rather feline movements. It leapt from the ground to the top of the mausoleum, and that's when I decided to just leave and run to my friend's house. One other time I was crossing a bridge, and I looked down and across. Stretching out into the water was this ramshackled pier, falling apart in that way that crappy handmade piers do. A creature was sitting on it. It had dog's head and a human-like body. The head and the fur coating the body reminded me of a dingo, at least from where I stood. Its arms were very long and elbows touched the ground. One leg was drawn up, but the other one dangled in the water. It looked almost... I don't know how to explain it. I started staring and whispered, WTF. Then I started to run, and I jumped on the next bike taxi I saw. All right, folks, some very horrifying encounters today. I hope you all enjoyed them as much as I enjoyed sharing them with you. And guys, I really do mean it every time I say it at the end of every video, that you guys and your support is what makes this channel so special. I'm just a guy with a microphone and some theories. You guys are the ones that really support this channel. Share your theories, share your opinions, and encounters. And it really is appreciated. So thank you so much. And with that being said, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant. Well, just in the woods, in your backyard, anytime you are not in the safety of a populated area. These creatures are everywhere. We've heard encounters from deep in the Appalachian to right in the boundaries or outskirts of cities. So, and with that, thank you, and God bless all of you.